Section 7. The Winged Hats. A Song to Mithras. Mithras, god of the morning, our trumpets waken the wall. Rome is above the nations, but thou art over all. Now as the names are answered and the guards are marched away, Mithras, also a soldier, give us strength for the day. Mithras, god of the noontide, the heather swims in the heat. Our helmets scorch our foreheads, our sandals burn our feet. Now in the ungirt hour, now ere we blink and drowse, Mithras, also a soldier, keep us true to our vows. Mithras, god of the sunset, low on the western main, thou descending immortal, immortal to rise again. Now when the watch is ended, now when the wine is drawn, Mithras, also a soldier, keep us pure till the dawn. Mithras, god of the midnight, here where the great bull lies, look on thy children in darkness, O take our sacrifice. Many roads thou hast fashioned, all of them lead to the light. Mithras, also a soldier, teach us to die aright. The Winged Hats. The next day happened to be what they called a wild afternoon. Father and Mother went out to pay calls. Miss Blake went for a ride on her bicycle, and they were left all alone till 8 o'clock. When they had seen their dear parents and their dear preceptress politely off the premises, they got a cabbage leaf full of raspberries from the gardener, and a wild tea from Ellen. They ate the raspberries to prevent their squashing, and they meant to divide the cabbage leaf with 3 cows down at the theatre, but they came across a dead hedgehog, which they simply had to bury, and the leaf was too useful to waste. Then they went on to the forge, and found old Hobden the hedger at home with his son the bee-boy, who is not quite right in his head, but who can pick up swarms of bees in his naked hands. And the bee-boy told them the rhyme about the slow-worm. If I had eyes as could see, no mortal man would trouble me. They all had tea together by the hives, and Hobden said the loaf-cake which Ellen had given them was almost as good as what his wife used to make, and he showed them how to set a wire at the right height for hares. They knew about rabbits already. They climbed up Long Ditch into the lower end of Far Wood. This is sadder and darker than the Volaterrae end, because of an old marl-pit full of black water, where weepy, hairy moss hangs round the stumps of the willows and alders. But the birds come to perch on the dead branches, and Hobden says that the bitter willow water is a sort of medicine for sick animals. They sat down on a felled oak trunk in the shadows of the beech undergrowth, and were looping the wires Hobden had given them, when they saw Parnesius. "How quietly you came," said Una, moving up to make room. "Where's Puck?" "The fawn and I have disputed whether it is better that I should tell you all my tale, or leave it untold," he replied. "I only said that if he told it as it happened, you wouldn't understand it," said Puck, jumping up like a squirrel from behind the log. "I don't understand all of it," said Una, "but I like hearing about the little Picts." "What I can't understand," said Dan, "is how Maximus knew all about the Picts when he was over in Gaul." "He who makes himself emperor anywhere must know everything everywhere," said Parnesius. "We had this much from Maximus' mouth after the games." "Games? What games?" said Dan. Parnesius stretched out his arm stiffly, thumb pointed to the ground. "Gladiators, that sort of game," he said. "There were 2 days' games in his honour when he landed all unexpected at Segedunum on the east end of the wall. Yes, the day after we had met him we held 2 days' games. But I think the greatest risk was run, not by the poor wretches on the sand, but by Maximus. In the old days the legions kept silence before their emperor. So did not we. You could hear the solid roar run west along the wall as his chair was carried rocking through the crowds. The garrison beat round him, clamouring, clowning, asking for pay, for change of quarters, for anything that came into their wild heads. That chair was like a little boat among waves, dipping and falling, but always rising again after one had shut the eyes. Parnesius shivered. "Were they angry with him?" said Dan. no more angry than wolves in a cage when their trainer walks among them. If he had turned his back an instant, or for an instant had ceased to hold their eyes, there would have been another emperor made on the wall that hour. Was it not so, Fawn? So it was. So it will always be, said Puck. Late in the evening his messenger came for us, and we followed to the Temple of Victory, where he lodged with Rutilianus, the general of the wall. I had hardly seen the general before, but he always gave me leave when I wished to take Heather. He was a great glutton, and kept 5 Asian cooks, and he came of a family that believed in oracles. We could smell his good dinner when we entered, but the tables were empty. He lay snorting on a couch. Maximus sat apart among long rolls of accounts. Then the doors were shut. "These are your men," said Maximus to the general, who propped his eye corners open with his gouty fingers and stared at us like a fish. "I shall know them again, Caesar," said Rutilianus. "Very good," said Maximus. "Now hear. You are not to move man or shield on the wall except as these boys shall tell you. You will do nothing except eat without their permission. They are the head and arms, you are the belly." "As Caesar pleases," the old man grunted. "If my pay and profits are not cut, you may make my ancestor's oracle my master. Rome has been, Rome has been." Then he turned on his side to sleep. "He has it," said Maximus. "We will get to what I need." He unrolled full copies of the number of men and supplies on the wall, down to the sick that very day in Hunno Hospital. Oh, but I groaned when his pen marked off detachment after detachment of our best, of our least worthless men. He took 2 towers of our Scythians, 2 of our North British auxiliaries, 2 Numidian cohorts, the Dacians all, and half the Belgians. It was like an eagle pecking a carcass. "And now, how many catapults have you?" He turned up a new list, but Pertinax laid his open hand there. "No, Caesar," said he, "do not tempt the gods too far. Take men or engines, but not both, else we refuse." "Engines?" said Una. "The catapults of the wall, huge things 40 feet high to the head, firing nets of raw stone or forged bolts. Nothing can stand against them. He left us our catapults at last, but he took a Caesar's half of our men without pity. We were a shell when he rolled up the lists." "Hail, Caesar! We, about to die, salute you," said Pertinax, laughing. "If any enemy even leans against the wall now, it will tumble." "Give me the 3 years Allo spoke of," he answered, "and you shall have 20,000 men of your own choosing up here. But now it is a gamble, a game played against the gods, and the stakes are Britain, Gaul, and perhaps Rome. You play on my side?" "We will play, Caesar," I said, for I had never met a man like this man. "Good. Tomorrow," said he, "I proclaim you captains of the wall before the troops." So we went into the moonlight, where they were cleaning the ground after the games. We saw the great Roma Dea atop of the wall, the frost on her helmet and her spear pointed towards the North Star. We saw the twinkle of night fires all along the guard towers, and the line of the black catapults growing smaller and smaller in the distance. All these things we knew till we were weary, but that night they seemed very strange to us, because the next day we knew we were to be their masters. The men took the news well, but when Maximus went away with half our strength, and we had to spread ourselves into the emptied towers, and the townspeople complained that trade would be ruined, and the autumn gales blew, it was dark days for us two. Here Pertinax was more than my right hand. Being born and bred among the great country houses in Gaul, he knew the proper words to address to all, from Roman-born centurions to those dogs of the third, the Libyans. And he spoke to each as though that man were as high-minded as himself. Now I saw so strongly what things were needed to be done, that I forgot things are only accomplished by means of men. That was a mistake. I feared nothing from the Picts, at least for that year, but Allo warned me that the winged hats would soon come in from the sea at each end of the wall to prove to the Picts how weak we were. So I made ready in haste, and none too soon. I shifted our best men to the ends of the wall, and set up screened catapults by the beach. The winged hats would drive in before the snow squalls, 10 or 20 boats at a time, on Segedunum or Ituna, according as the wind blew. Now a ship coming in to land men must furl her sail. If you wait till you see her men gather up the sail's foot, your catapults can jerk a net of loose stones, bolts only cut through the cloth, into the bag of it. Then she turns over, and the sea makes everything clean again. A few men may come ashore, but very few. It was not hard work, except the waiting on the beach in blowing sand and snow. And that was how we dealt with the winged hats that winter. Early in the spring, when the east winds blow like skinning knives, they gathered again off the east end with many ships. Allo told me that they would never rest till they had taken a tower in open fight. Certainly they fought in the open. We dealt with them thoroughly through a long day, and when all was finished, one man dived clear of the wreckage of his ship and swam towards shore. I waited, and a wave tumbled him at my feet. As I stooped, I saw he wore such a medal as I wear. Parnesius raised his hand to his neck. Therefore, when he could speak, I addressed him a certain question which can only be answered in a certain manner. He answered with the necessary word, the word that belongs to the degree of griffins in the science of Mithras, my god. I put my shield over him till he could stand up. You see, I am not short, but he was a head taller than I. He said, "What now?" I said, "At your pleasure, my brother, to stay or go." He looked out across the surf. There remained one ship unhurt, beyond range of our catapults. I checked the catapults, and he waved her in. She came as a hound comes to a master. When she was yet 100 paces from the beach, he flung back his hair and swam out. They hauled him in and went away. I knew that those who worship Mithras are many and of all races, so I did not think much more upon the matter. A month later I saw Allo with his horses, by the temple of Pan, O Faun, and he gave me a great necklace of gold studded with coral. At first I thought it was a bribe from some tradesman in the town, meant for old Rutilianus. "Nay," said Allo, "this is a gift from Amal, that winged hat whom you saved on the beach. He says you are a man." "He is a man, too. Tell him I can wear his gift," I answered. "Oh, Amal is a young fool. But, speaking as sensible men, your emperor is doing such great things in Gaul that the winged hats are anxious to be his friends, or better still, the friends of his servants. They think you and Pertinax could lead them to victories." Allo looked at me like a one-eyed raven. "Allo," I said, "you are the corn between two millstones. Be content if they grind evenly, and don't thrust your hand between them." "I," said Allo, "I hate Rome and the winged hats equally. But if the winged hats thought that some day you and Pertinax might join them against Maximus, they would leave you in peace while you considered. Time is what we need, you and I and Maximus. Let me carry a pleasant message back to the winged hats, something for them to make a council over. We barbarians are all alike. We sit up half the night to discuss anything a Roman says, eh?" "We have no men. We must fight with words," said Pertinax. "Leave it to Allo and me." So Allo carried word back to the winged hats that we would not fight them if they did not fight us, and they, I think they were a little tired of losing men in the sea, agreed to a sort of truce. I believe Allo, who being a horse dealer loved lies, also told them we might some day rise against Maximus as Maximus had risen against Rome. Indeed, they permitted the corn ships which I sent to the Picts to pass north that season without harm. Therefore the Picts were well fed that winter, and since they were in some sort my children, I was glad of it. We had only 2,000 men on the wall, and I wrote many times to Maximus and prayed him to send me only one cohort of my old North British troops. He could not spare them. He needed them to win more victories in Gaul. Then came news that he had defeated and slain the Emperor Gratian, and thinking he must now be secure, I wrote again for men. He answered, You will learn that I have at last settled accounts with the pup Gratian. There was no need that he should have died, but he became confused and lost his head, which is a bad thing to befall any emperor. Tell your father I am content to drive 2 mules only, for unless my old general's son thinks himself destined to destroy me, I shall rest Emperor of Gaul and Britain, and then you, my 2 children, will presently get all the men you need. Just now I can spare none." "What did he mean by his general's son?" said Dan. "He meant Theodosius, Emperor of Rome, who was the son of Theodosius, the general under whom Maximus had fought in the old Pict War. The 2 men never loved each other, and when Gratian made the younger Theodosius Emperor of the East, at least so I've heard, Maximus carried on the war to the 2nd generation. It was his fate and his fall. But Theodosius the Emperor is a good man, as I know." Parnesius was silent for a moment, and then continued. "I wrote back to Maximus that, though we had peace on the wall, I should be happier with a few more men and some new catapults. He answered, 'You must live a little longer under the shadow of my victories, till I can see what young Theodosius intends. He may welcome me as a brother emperor, or he may be preparing an army. In either case, I cannot spare men just now.'" "But he was always saying that," cried Una. "It was true. He did not make excuses. But thanks, as he said, to the news of his victories, we had no trouble on the wall for a long, long time. The Picts grew fat as their own sheep among the heather, and as many of my men as lived were well exercised in their weapons. Yes, the wall looked strong. For myself, I knew how weak we were. I knew that if even a false rumour of any defeat to Maximus broke loose among the winged hats, they might come down in earnest, and then the wall must go. For the Picts I never cared, but in those years I learned something of the strength of the winged hats. They increased their strength every day, but I could not increase my men. Maximus had emptied Britain behind us, and I felt myself to be a man with a rotten stick standing before a broken fence to turn bulls. Thus, my friends, we lived on the wall, waiting, waiting, waiting for the men that Maximus never sent. Presently he wrote that he was preparing an army against Theodosius. He wrote, and Pertinax read it over my shoulder in our quarters, "Tell your father that my destiny orders me to drive 3 mules or be torn in pieces by them. I hope within a year to finish with Theodosius, son of Theodosius, once and for all. Then you shall have Britain to rule, and Pertinax, if he chooses, Gaul. Today I wish strongly you were with me to beat my auxiliaries into shape. Do not, I pray you, believe any rumour of my sickness. I have a little evil in my old body, which I shall cure by riding swiftly into Rome." Said Pertinax, "It is finished with Maximus. He writes as a man without hope. I, a man without hope, can see this. What does he add at the bottom of the roll?" "Tell Pertinax I have met his late uncle, the Duumvir of Divio, and that he accounted to me quite truthfully for all his mother's moneys. I have sent her with a fitting escort, for she is a mother of a hero, to Nicaea, where the climate is warm." "That is proof," said Pertinax. "Nicaea is not far by sea from Rome. A woman there could take ship and fly to Rome in time of war. Yes, Maximus foresees his death and is fulfilling his promises one by one. But I am glad my uncle met him." "You think blackly today?" I asked. "I think truth. The gods weary of the play we have played against them. Theodosius will destroy Maximus. It is finished." "Will you write him that?" I said. "See what I shall write," he answered, and he took pen and wrote a letter cheerful as the light of day, tender as a woman's and full of jests. Even I, reading over his shoulder, took comfort from it, till I saw his face. "And now," he said, sealing it, "we be 2 dead men, my brother. Let us go to the temple." We prayed a while to Mithras, where we had many times prayed before. After that we lived day by day among evil rumours till winter came again. It happened one morning that we rowed to the east shore, and found on the beach a fair-haired man, half frozen, bound to some broken planks. Turning him over, we saw by his belt-buckle that he was a Goth of an Eastern legion. Suddenly he opened his eyes and cried loudly, "He is dead! The letters were with me, but the winged hats sunk the ship." So saying, he died between our hands. We asked not who was dead, we knew. We raced before the driving snow to Hunno, thinking perhaps Allo might be there. We found him already at our stables, and he saw by our faces what we had heard. "It was in a tent by the sea," he stammered. "He was beheaded by Theodosius. He sent a letter to you, written while he waited to be slain. The winged hats met the ship and took it. The news is running through the heather like fire. Blame me not. I cannot hold back my young men any more." "I would we could say as much for our men," said Pertinax, laughing, "but God be praised, they cannot run away." "What do you do?" said Allo. "I bring an order, a message from the winged hats that you join them with your men and march south to plunder Britain." "It grieves me," said Pertinax, "but we are stationed here to stop that thing." "If I carry back such an answer, they will kill me," said Allo. "I always promised the winged hats that you would rise when Maximus fell. I did not think he could fall." "Alas, my poor barbarian," said Pertinax, still laughing. "Well, you have sold us too many good ponies to be thrown back to your friends. We will make you a prisoner, although you are an ambassador." "Yes, that will be best," said Allo, holding out a halter. We bound him lightly, for he was an old man. "Presently the winged hats may come to look for you, and that will give us more time. See how the habit of playing for time sticks to a man?" said Pertinax, as he tied the rope. "No," I said, "time may help. If Maximus wrote us letters while he was a prisoner, Theodosius must have sent the ship that brought it. If he can send ships, he can send men." "How will that profit us?" said Pertinax. "We serve Maximus, not Theodosius. Even if by some miracle of the gods Theodosius down south sent and saved the wall, we could not expect more than the death Maximus died." "It concerns us to defend the wall, no matter what emperor dies or makes die," I said. "That is worthy of your brother the philosopher," said Pertinax. "Myself I am without hope, so I do not say solemn and stupid things. Rouse the wall." We armed the wall from end to end. We told the officers that there was a rumour of Maximus's death which might bring down the winged hats, but we were sure, even if it were true, that Theodosius, for the sake of Britain, would send us help. Therefore we must stand fast. My friends, it is above all things strange to see how men bear ill news. Often the strongest till then become the weakest, while the weakest, as it were, reach up and steal strength from the gods. So it was with us. Yet my Pertinax, by his jests and his courtesy and his labours, had put heart and training into our poor numbers during the past years, more than I should have thought possible. Even our Libyan cohort, the thirds, stood up in their padded cuirasses and did not whimper. In 3 days came 7 chiefs and elders of the winged hats. Among them was that tall young man, Amal, whom I had met on the beach, and he smiled when he saw my necklace. We made them welcome, for they were ambassadors. We showed them Allo, alive but bound. They thought we had killed him, and I saw it would not have vexed them if we had. Allo saw it too, and it vexed him. Then in our quarters at Hunno we came to council. They said that Rome was falling, and that we must join them. They offered me all South Britain to govern after they had taken a tribute out of it. I answered, "Patience, this wall is not weighed off like plunder. Give me proof that my general is dead." "Nay," said one elder, "prove to us that he lives." And another said, cunningly, "What will you give us if we read you his last words?" "We are not merchants to bargain," cried Amal. "Moreover, I owe this man my life. He shall have his proof." He threw across to me a letter, well I knew the seal, from Maximus. "We took this out of the ship we sunk," he cried. "I cannot read, but I know one sign at least, which makes me believe." He showed me a dark stain on the outer roll that my heavy heart perceived was the valiant blood of Maximus. "Read," said Amal, "read, and then let us hear whose servants you are." said Pertinax, very softly, after he had looked through it. "I will read it all. Listen, barbarians." He read from that which I have carried next to my heart ever since. Parnesius drew from his neck a folded and spotted piece of parchment, and began in a hushed voice. "To Parnesius and Pertinax, the not unworthy captains of the wall, from Maximus, once Emperor of Gaul and Britain, now prisoner, waiting death by the sea in the camp of Theodosius. Greeting and good-bye." "Enough," said young Amal. "There is your proof. You must join us now." Pertinax looked long and silently at him, till that fair man blushed like a girl. Then read Pertinax, "I have joyfully done much evil in my life to those who have wished me evil, but if I ever did any evil to you two, I repent and ask your forgiveness. The 3 mules which I strove to drive have torn me in pieces, as your father prophesied. The naked swords wait at the tent door to give me the death I gave to Gratian. Therefore I, your general and your emperor, send you free and honourable dismissal from my service, which you entered, not for money or office, but, as it makes me warm to believe, because you loved me." "By the light of the sun," Amal broke in, "this was in some sort a man. We may have been mistaken in his servants." And Pertinax read on. "You gave me the time for which I asked. If I have failed to use it, do not lament. We have gambled very splendidly against the gods, but they hold weighted dice, and I must pay the forfeit. Remember, I have been, but Rome is, and Rome will be. Tell Pertinax his mother is in safety at Nicaea, and her moneys are in charge of the prefect at Antipolis. Make my remembrances to your father and to your mother, whose friendship was a great gain to me. Give also to my little Picts and to the winged hats such messages as their thick heads can understand. I would have sent you 3 legions this very day if all had gone aright. Do not forget me. We have worked together. Farewell, farewell, farewell." Now that was my emperor's last letter. The children heard the parchment crackle as Parnesius returned it to its place. "I was mistaken," said Amal. "The servants of such a man will sell nothing except over the sword. I am glad of it." He held out his hand to me. "But Maximus has given you your dismissal," said an elder. "You are certainly free to serve, or to rule whom you please. Join, do not follow, join us." "We thank you," said Pertinax, "but Maximus tells us to give you such messages as, pardon me, but I use his words, your thick heads can understand." He pointed through the door to the foot of a catapult wound up. "We understand," said an elder. "The wall must be won at a price." "It grieves me," said Pertinax, laughing, "but so it must be won." And he gave them of our best southern wine. They drank and wiped their yellow beards in silence till they rose to go. Said Amal, stretching himself, for they were barbarians, "We be a goodly company. I wonder what the ravens and the dogfish will make of some of us before this snow melts." "Think rather what Theodosius may send," I answered, and though they laughed, I saw that my chance shot troubled them. Only old Aloe lingered behind a little. "You see," he said, winking and blinking, "I am no more than their dog. When I have shown their men the secret short ways across our bogs, they will kick me like one." "Then I should not be in haste to show them those ways," said Pertinax, "till I was sure that Rome could not save the wall." "You think so? Woe is me," said the old man. "I only wanted peace for my people," and he went out stumbling through the snow behind the tall winged hats. In this fashion then, slowly, a day at a time, which is very bad for doubting troops, the war came upon us. At first the winged hats swept in from the sea as they had done before, and there we met them as before, with the catapults, and they sickened of it. Yet for a long time they would not trust their duck legs on land, and I think when it came to revealing the secrets of the tribe, the little Picts were afraid or ashamed to show them all the roads across the heather. I had this from a Pict prisoner. They were as much our spies as our enemies, for the winged hats oppressed them and took their winter stores. Ah, foolish little people! Then the winged hats began to roll us up from each end of the wall. I sent runners southward to see what the news might be in Britain, but the wolves were very bold that winter among the deserted stations where the troops had once been, and none came back. We had trouble, too, with the forage for the ponies along the wall. I kept 10, and so did Pertinax. We lived and slept in the saddle riding east or west, and we ate our worn-out ponies. The people of the town also made us some trouble till I gathered them all in one quarter behind Hunno. We broke down the wall on either side of it to make, as it were, a citadel. Our men fought better in close order. By the end of the 2nd month we were deep in the war as a man is deep in a snowdrift or in a dream. I think we fought in our sleep. At least I know I have gone on the wall and come off again, remembering nothing between, though my throat was harsh with giving orders, and my sword, I could see, had been used. The winged hats fought like wolves, all in a pack. Where they had suffered most, there they charged in most hotly. This was hard for the defender, but it held them from sweeping on in Britain. In those days Pertinax and I wrote on the plaster of the bricked archway into Valentia the names of the towers, and the days on which they fell one by one. We wished for some record. And the fighting? The fight was always hottest to left and right of the great statue of Romodea, near to Rutilianus's house. By the light of the sun, that fat old man, whom we had not considered at all, grew young again among the trumpets. I remember he said his sword was an oracle. "Let us consult the oracle," he would say, and put the handle against his ear, and shake his head wisely. "And this day is allowed Rutilianus to live," he would say, and, tucking up his cloak, he would puff and pant and fight well. Oh, there were jests in plenty on the wall to take the place of food. We endured for 2 months and 17 days, always being pressed from 3 sides into a smaller space. Several times Allo sent in word that help was at hand. We did not believe it, but it cheered our men. The end came, not with shoutings of joy, but like the rest, as in a dream. The winged hats suddenly left us in peace for one night and the next day, which is too long for spent men. We slept at first lightly, expecting to be roused, and then like logs, each where he lay. May you never need such sleep. When I waked, our towers were full of strange, armed men, who watched us snoring. I roused Pertinax, and we leapt up together. "What?" said a young man in clean armour. "Do you fight against Theodosius? Look." North we looked over the red snow. No winged hats were there. South we looked over the white snow, and behold, there were the eagles of 2 strong legions encamped. East and west we saw flame and fighting, but by Hunno all was still. "Trouble no more," said the young man. "Rome's arm is long. Where are the captains of the wall?" We said we were those men. "But you are old and grey-haired," he cried. "Maximus said they were boys." "Yes, that was true some years ago," said Pertinax. "What is our fate to be, you fine and well-fed child?" "I am called Ambrosius, a secretary of the emperor," he answered. "Show me a certain letter which Maximus wrote from a tent at Aquileia, and perhaps I will believe." I took it from my breast, and when he had read it he saluted us, saying, "Your fate is in your own hands. If you choose to serve Theodosius, he will give you a legion. If it suits you to go to your homes, we will give you a triumph." "I would like better a bath, wine, food, razors, soaps, oils, and scents," said Pertinax, laughing. "Oh, I see you are a boy," said Ambrosius. "And you?" turning to me. "We bear no ill will against Theodosius, but in war—" I began. "In war it is as in love," said Pertinax. "Whether she be good or bad, one gives one's best once, to one only. That given, there remains no second worth giving or taking." "That is true," said Ambrosius. "I was with Maximus before he died. He warned Theodosius that you would never serve him, and frankly I say I am sorry for my emperor." "He has Rome to console him," said Pertinax. "I ask you of your kindness to let us go to our homes, and get this smell out of our nostrils." None the less they gave us a triumph. "It was well earned," said Puck, throwing some leaves into the still water of the marl pit. The black oily circles spread dizzily as the children watched them. "I want to know, oh, ever so many things," said Dan. "What happened to old Allo? Did the winged hats ever come back? And what did Amal do?" "And what happened to the fat old general with the 5 cooks?" said Una. "And what did your mother say?" "She'd say as you're settin' too long over this old pit, so late as 'tis already," said old Hobden's voice behind them. "Hist!" he whispered. He stood still, for not 20 paces away a magnificent dog-fox sat on his haunches and looked at the children as though he were an old friend of theirs. "Oh, Mus' Reynolds, said Hobden under his breath. "If I knowed all was inside your head, I'd know something worth knowing. Mus' Dan and Miss Una, come along with me while I lock up my little hen house." End of section 7. The Winged Hats. Section 8. Hal o' the Draught. A Pict Song. Rome never looks where she treads, always her heavy hoofs fall on our stomachs, our hearts, or our heads, and Rome never heeds when we bawl. Her sentries pass on, that is all, and we gather behind them in hordes, and plot to reconquer the wall with only our tongues for our swords. We are the little folk, we, too little to love or to hate. Leave us alone and you'll see how we can drag down the great. We are the worm in the wood, we are the rot at the root, we are the germ in the blood, we are the thorn in the foot. Mistletoe killing an oak, rats gnawing cables in two, moths making holes in a cloak, how they must love what they do. Yes, and we little folk too, we are as busy as they, working our works out of view. Watch, and you'll see it some day. No, indeed, we are not strong, but we know peoples that are. Yes, and we'll guide them along to smash and destroy you in war. We shall be slaves just the same? Yes, we have always been slaves, but you will die of the shame, and then we shall dance on your graves. Hal o' the Draught. Prophets have honour all over the earth, except in the village where they were born, where such as knew them boys from birth naturally hold them in scorn. When prophets are naughty and young and vain, they make a wonderful grievance of it. You can see by their writings how they complain, but oh, 'tis wonderful good for the prophet. There's nothing Nineveh town can give, nor being swallowed by whales between, makes up for the place where a man's folk live that don't care nothing what he has been. He might have been that, or he might have been this, but they love and they hate him for what he is. Hal o' the Draught. A rainy afternoon drove Dan and Una over to play pirates in the little mill. If you don't mind rats on the rafters and oats in your shoes, the mill attic, with its trapdoors and inscriptions on beams about floods and sweethearts, is a splendid place. It is lighted by a foot-square window called Duck Window that looks across to Little Linden's farm and the spot where Jack Cade was killed. When they had climbed the attic ladder, they called it the mainmast tree out of the ballad of Sir Andrew Barton, and Jack "swarved it with might and main," as the ballad says, they saw a man sitting on Duck Window sill. He was dressed in a plum-coloured doublet and tight plum-coloured hose, and he drew busily in a red-edged book. Sit ye, Puck cried from a rafter overhead. "See what it is to be beautiful? Sir Harry Daw, Hal, says I am the very image of a head for a gargoyle." The man laughed and raised his dark velvet cap to the children, and his grizzled hair bristled out in a stormy fringe. He was old, 40 at least, but his eyes were young, with funny little wrinkles all round them. A satchel of embroidered leather hung from his broad belt, which looked interesting. "May we see?" said Una, coming forward. Surely, he said, moving up on the window-seat, and returned to his work with a silver-pointed pencil. Puck sat as though the grin were fixed for ever on his broad face, while they watched the quick, certain fingers that copied it. Presently the man took a reed pen from his satchel and trimmed it with a little ivory knife carved in the semblance of a fish. "Oh, what a beauty!" cried Dan. "'Ware fingers! That blade is perilous sharp. I made it myself of the best low country crossbow steel, and so too this fish. When his back fin travels to his tail, so, he swallows up the blade, even as the whale swallowed up Gaffer Jonah. Yes, and that's my inkhorn. I made the 4 silver saints round it. Press Barnabas's head. It opens, and then—" He dipped the trimmed pen and with careful boldness began to put in the essential lines of Puck's rugged face that had been but faintly revealed by the silver point. The children gasped, for it fairly leapt from the page. As he worked, and the rain fell on the tiles, he talked, now clearly, now muttering, now breaking off to frown or smile at his work. He told them he was born at Little Linden's Farms, and his father used to beat him for drawing things instead of doing things, till an old priest called Father Roger, who drew illuminated letters in rich people's books, coaxed the parents to let him take the boy as a sort of painter's apprentice. Then he went with Father Roger to Oxford, where he cleaned plates and carried cloaks and shoes for the scholars of a college called Merton. "Didn't you hate that?" said Dan after a great many other questions. "I never thought on't. Half Oxford was building new colleges or beautifying the old, and she had called to her aid the master craftsmen of all Christendom, kings in their trade and honoured of kings. I knew them, I worked for them, that was enough. No wonder—" He stopped and laughed. "You became a great man," said Puck. "They said so, Robin. Even Bramante said so." "Why, what did you do?" Dan asked. The artist looked at him queerly. "Things in stone and such, up and down England. You would not have heard of 'em. To come nearer home, I rebuilded this little St. Bartholomew's church of ours. It cost me more trouble and sorrow than aught I've touched in my life. But 'twas a sound lesson." Said Dan, "we had lessons this morning." "I'll not afflict ye, lad," said Hal, while Puck roared. "Only 'tis strange to think how that little church was rebuilt, re-roofed, and made glorious, thanks to some few godly Sussex ironmasters, a Bristol sailor lad, a proud ass called Halla the Draught, because, d'you see, he was always drawing and drafting, and—" he dragged the words slowly, "and a Scotch pirate." "Pirate?" said Dan. He wriggled like a hooked fish. "Even that Andrew Barton you were singing of on the stair just now." He dipped again in the inkwell, and held his breath over a sweeping line, as though he had forgotten everything else. "Pirates don't build churches, do they?" said Dan. "Or do they?" "They help mightily," Hal laughed. "But you were at your lessons this morning, Jack Scholar?" "Oh, pirates aren't lessons. It was only Bruce and his silly old spider," said Una. "Why did Sir Andrew Barton help you?" "I question if he ever knew it," said Hal, twinkling. "Robin, how a mischief's name am I to tell these innocents what comes of sinful pride?" "Oh, we know about that," said Una pertly. "If you get too beany, that's cheeky, you get sat upon, of course." Hal considered a moment, pen in air, and Puck said some long words. "Aha, that was my case too," he cried. "Beany, you say. But certainly I did not conduct myself well. I was proud of such things as porches, a Galilee porch at Lincoln for choice, proud of one Torrigiano's arm on my shoulder, proud of my knighthood when I made the gilt scroll-work for the Sovereign, our king's ship. But Father Roger, sitting in Merton Library, he did not forget me. At the top of my pride, when I and no other should have builded the porch at Lincoln, he laid it on me with a terrible forefinger to go back to my Sussex clays and rebuild, at my own charges, my own church, where we Dawes have been buried for 6 generations. 'Out, son of my art,' said he, 'fight the devil at home ere ye call yourself a man and a craftsman.' And I quaked, and I went. How's yon, Robin?" He flourished the finished sketch before Puck. Me past peradventure," said Puck, smirking like a man at a mirror. "Ah, see, the rain has took off. I hate housen in daylight." "Whoop, holiday!" cried Hal, leaping up. "Who's for my Little Lindens? We can talk there." They tumbled downstairs, and turned past the dripping willows by the Sunny Mill Dam. Body o' me, said Hal, staring at the hop garden, where the hops were just ready to blossom. What are these vines? No, not vines, and they twine the wrong way to beans. He began to draw in his ready book. Hops, new since your day, said Puck. They're an herb of Mars, and their flowers dried flavour ale. We say, turkeys, heresy, hops and beer came into England all in 1 year. Heresy I know. I've seen hops, God be praised for their beauty. What is your turkis? The children laughed. They all knew the Linden's turkeys, and as soon as they reached Linden's orchard on the hill, the flock charged at them. Out came Hal's book at once. Hoity-toity, he cried, here's pride in purple feathers. Here's wrathy contempt and the pomps of the flesh. How do you call them? Turkeys, turkeys, the children shouted, as the old gobbler raved and flamed against Hal's plum-coloured hose. Save your magnificence, he said. I've drafted 2 good new things today, and he doffed his cap to the bubbling bird. Then they walked through the grass to the knoll where the little Lindens stands. The old farmhouse, weather-tiled to the ground, took almost the colour of a blood ruby in the afternoon light. The pigeons pecked at the mortar in the chimney-stacks. The bees that had lived under the tiles since it was built filled the hot August air with their booming, and the smell of the box-tree by the dairy window mixed with the smell of earth after rain, bread after baking, and a tickle of wood smoke. The farmer's wife came to the door, baby on arm, shaded her brows against the sun, stooped to pluck a sprig of rosemary, and turned down the orchard. The old spaniel in his barrel barked once or twice to show he was in charge of the empty house. Puck clicked back the garden gate. Do you marvel that I love it? Said Hal in a whisper. What can townfolk know of the nature of housen or land? They perched themselves a row on the old hacked oak bench in Linden's garden, looking across the valley of the brook at the fern-covered dimples and hollows of the forge behind Hopton's cottage. The old man was cutting a faggot in his garden by the hives. It was quite a second after his chopper fell that the chump of the blow reached their lazy ears. "Hey, yeah," said Hal. "I mind when where that old gaffer stands was Nether Forge, Master John Collins's foundry. Many a night has his big trip-hammer shook me in my bed here, boom-bitty, boom-bitty. If the wind was east, I could hear Master Tom Collins's forge at Stockens answering his brother, boom-whoop, boom-whoop, and midway between, Sir John Pelham's sledgehammers at Brightling would strike in like a pack of scholars, and hick-hack-hock, they'd say, hick-hack-hock, till I fell asleep. Yes, the valley was as full of forges and fineries as a May shore o' cuckoos, all gone to grass now." "What did they make?" said Dan. "Guns for the king's ships, and for others. Serpentines and cannon mostly. When the guns were cast, down would come the king's officers and take our plough-oxen to haul them to the coast. Look, here's one of the first and finest craftsmen of the sea." He fluttered back a page of his book and showed them a young man's head. Underneath was written Sebastianus. He came down with a king's order on Master John Collins for 20 serpentines, wicked little cannon they be, to furnish a venture of ships. I drafted him thus, sitting by our fire, telling mother of the new lands he'd find the far side of the world. And he found them too. There's a nose to cleave through unknown seas. Cabot was his name, a Bristol lad, half a foreigner. I set a heap by him. He helped me to my church building. "I thought that was Sir Andrew Barton," said Dan. "Aye, but foundations before roofs," Hal answered. "Sebastian first put me in the way of it. I had come down here not to serve God as a craftsman should, but to show my people how great a craftsman I was. They cared not, and it served me right, one split straw for my craft or my greatness. What a moraine call had I, they said, to mell with old St. Barnabas's. Ruinous the church had been since the Black Death, and ruinous she should remain, and I could hang myself in my new scaffold ropes. Gentle and simple, high and low, the Hays, the Fowles, the Fanners, and the Collinses, they were all in a tale against me. Only Sir John Pelham up yonder to Brightling bade me heart up and go on. Yet how could I? Did I ask Master Collins for his timber tug to haul beams? The oxen had gone to Lewis after lime. Did he promise me a set of iron cramps or ties for the roof? They never came to hand, or else they were spalty or cracked. So with everything. Nothing said, but naught done except I stood by them, and then done amiss. I thought the countryside was fair bewitched. It was, surely, said Puck, knees under chin. Did you never suspect anyone? Not till Sebastian came for his guns, and John Collins played him the same dog's tricks as he'd played me with my ironwork. Week in, week out, 2 of the 3 serpentines would be flawed in the casting, and only fit, they said, to be remelted. Then John Collins would shake his head, and vow he could pass no cannon for the king's service that were not perfect. Saints, how Sebastian stormed! I know, for we sat on this bench sharing our sorrows into common. When Sebastian had fumed away 6 weeks at Linden's, and gotten just 6 serpentines, Dirk Brenzett, master of the Signet Hoy, sends me word that the block of stone he was fetching me from France for our new font he'd hove overboard to lighten his ship, chased by Andrew Barton up to Rye Port. Ah, the pirate, said Dan. Yes, and while I'm tearing my hair over this, Ticehurst Will, my best mason, comes to me shaking and vowing that the devil, horned, tailed, and chained, has run out on him from the church tower, and the men would work there no more. So I took 'em off the foundations, which we were strengthening, and went into the Bell Tavern for a cup of ale. Says Master John Collins, "Have it your own way, lad, but if I was you, I'd take the signification of the sign, and leave old Barnabas's church alone." And they all wagged their sinful heads and agreed, less afraid of the devil than of me, as I saw later. When I brought my sweet news to Linden's, Sebastian was lime-washing the kitchen beams for mother. He loved her like a son. "Cheer up, lad," he says. "God's where he was. Only you and I chance to be pure pute asses. We've been tricked, Hal, and more shame to me, a sailor, that I didn't guess it before. You must leave your belfry alone, forsooth, because the devil is adrift there, and I cannot get my serpentines, because John Collins cannot cast them aright. Meantime, Andrew Barton hawks off the port of Rye, and why? To take those very serpentines which poor Cabot must whistle for. The said serpentines, I'll wager my share of the new continents, being now hid away in St. Barnabas Church Tower, clear as the Irish coast at noonday." "They'd sure never dare do it," I said, "and for another thing, selling cannon to the king's enemies is black treason. Hanging and fine." "It is sure large profit. Men'll dare any gallows for that. I have been a trader myself," says he. "We must be upsides with 'em for the honour of Bristol." Then he hatched a plot, sitting on the lime-wash bucket. We gave out to ride a Tuesday to London, and made a show of making farewells of our friends, especially of Master John Collins. But at Wadhurst Woods we turned, rode by night to the water meadows, hid our horses in a willow tot at the foot of the glebe, and stole a tiptoe uphill to Barnabas's church again, a thick mist and a moon coming through. I had no sooner locked the tower door behind us than over goes Sebastian full length in the dark. "Pest!" he says. "Step high and feel low, Hal. I've stumbled over guns before." I groped, and one by one, the tower was pitchy dark, I counted the lither barrels of 20 serpentines laid out on pease straw. No conceal at all. "There's 2 demi-cannon my end," says Sebastian, slapping metal. "They'll be for Andrew Barton's lower deck. Honest? Honest John Collins. So this is his warehouse, his arsenal, his armoury. Now you see why your pokings and pryings have raised the devil in Sussex. You've hindered John's lawful trade for months." And he laughed where he lay. A clay-cold tower is no fireside at midnight, so we climbed the belfry stairs, and there Sebastian trips over a cowhide with its horns and tail. "Aha! Your devil has left his doublet. Does it become me, Hal?" He draws it on and capers in the slits of window moonlight, wonderful devilish-like. Then he sits on the stair, rapping with his tail on a board, and his back aspect was dreader than his front, and a howlet lit in and screeched at the horns of him. "If you'd keep out the devil, shut the door," he whispered, "and that's another false proverb, Hal, for I can hear your tower door opening." "I locked it. Who a plague has another key then?" I said. "All the congregation, to judge by their feet," he says, and peers into the blackness. "Still, still, Hal, hear 'em grunt. That's more o' my serpentines, I'll be bound. 1, 2, 3, 4 they bear in. Faith, Andrew equips himself like an admiral. 24 serpentines in all." As if it had been an echo, we heard John Collins's voice come up all hollow. 24 serpentines and 2 demi-cannon. That's the full tally for Sir Andrew Barton. "Courtesy costs naught," whispers Sebastian. "Shall I drop my dagger on his head?" "They go over to Rye on Thursday in the wool wains, hidden under the wool packs. Dirk Brenzett meets them at Udimore, as before," says John. "Lord, what a worn, hand-smooth trade it is," says Sebastian. "I lay we are the sole 2 babes in the village that have not our lawful share in the venture." There was a full score folk below, talking like all Robertsbridge market. We counted them by voice. Master John Collins pipes, "The guns for the French carrack must lie here next month. Well, when does your young fool, me, so please you, come back from London?" "No odds," I heard Ticehurst Will answer. "Lay 'em just where you've a mind, Mus Collins. We're all too afraid of the devil to mell with the tower now." And the long knave laughed. "Ah, 'tis easy now for you to raise the devil, Will," says another, Ralph Hobden from the forge. "Amen," roars Sebastian, and ere I could hold him he leaps down the stairs, wonderful devilish like, howling no bounds. He had scarce time to lay out for the nearest than they ran. Saints, how they ran! We heard them pound on the door of the Bell Tavern, and then we ran too. "What's next?" says Sebastian, looping up his cow-tail as he leapt the briars. "I've broke honest John's face." "Ride to Sir John Pelham's," I said. "He is the only one that ever stood by me." We rode to Brightling, and past Sir John's lodges, where the keepers would have shot at us for deer-stealers, and we had Sir John down into his justice's chair, and when we had told him our tale, and showed him the cowhide which Sebastian still wore girt about him, he laughed till the tears ran. "Well a well," he says, "I'll see justice done before daylight. What's your complaint? Master Collins is my old friend." "He's none of mine," I cried, "when I think how he and his likes have balked and dozened and cozened me at every turn over the church," and I choked at the thought. "Ah, but ye see now that they needed it for another use," says he smoothly. "So they did my serpentines," Sebastian cries. "I should be half across the Western Ocean by this if my guns had been ready, but they're sold to a Scotch pirate by your old friend." "Where's your proof?" says Sir John, stroking his beard. "I broke my shins over them not an hour since, and I heard John give order where they were to be taken," says Sebastian. "Words, words only," says Sir John. "Master Collins is somewhat of a liar at best." He carried it so gravely that for the moment I thought he was dipped in this secret traffic too, and that there was not an honest ironmaster in Sussex. "Name of reason," says Sebastian, and raps with his cowtail on the table. "Whose guns are they then?" "Yours, manifestly," says Sir John. "You come with the king's order for 'em, and Master Collins cast them in his foundry. If he chooses to bring them up from Nether Forge and lay them out in the church tower, why, they are in so much nearer to the main road, and you are saved a day's hauling. What a coil to make of a mere act of neighbourly kindness, lad." "I fear I have requited him very scurvily," says Sebastian, looking at his knuckles. "But what of the demi-cannon? I could do with them well, but they are not in the king's order." "Kindness, loving kindness," says Sir John. "Questionless, in his zeal for the king and his love for you, John adds those 2 cannon as a gift. 'Tis plain as this coming daylight, ye stockfish." "So it is," says Sebastian. "Oh, Sir John, why did you never use the sea? You are lost ashore." and he looked on him with great love. I do my best in my station. Sir John strokes his beard again, and rolls forth his deep drumming justice's voice thus. But, suffer me, you two lads, on some midnight frolic into which I probe not, roystering around the taverns, surprise Master Collins at his— he thinks a moment— at his good deeds done by stealth. Ye surprise him, I say, cruelly. Truth, Sir John, if you had seen him run, says Sebastian. On this you ride breakneck to me with a tale of pirates, and woolwains, and cowhides, which, though it hath moved my mirth as a man, offendeth my reason as a magistrate. So I will e'en accompany you back to the Tower with, perhaps, some few of my own people, and 3 to 4 waggons, and I'll be your warrant that Master John Collins will freely give you your guns and your demi-cannon, Master Sebastian. He breaks into his proper voice. I warned the old Tod and his neighbours long ago that they'd come to trouble with their side-sellings and by-dealings, but we cannot have half Sussex hanged for a little gun-running. Are ye content, lads? I'd commit any treason for 2 demi-cannon, said Sebastian, and rubs his hands. Ye have just compounded with rank treason felony for the same bribe, says Sir John, wherefore to horse, and get the guns. But Master Collins meant the guns for Sir Andrew Barton all along, didn't he? Said Dan. Questionless, that he did, said Hal, but he lost them. We poured into the village on the red edge of dawn, Sir John horsed, in half armour, his pennon flying. Behind him 30 stout brightling knaves, 5 abreast, behind them 4 woolwains, and behind them 4 trumpets to triumph over the jest, blowing, Our king went forth to Normandy. When we halted and rolled the ringing guns out of the tower, 'twas for all the world like Friar Roger's picture of the French siege in the Queen's Missal book. And what did our village do? Said Dan. Oh, bore it nobly, nobly, cried Hal. Though they had tricked me, I was proud of us. They came out of their housen, looked at that little army as though it had been a post, and went their shut-mouthed way. Never a sign, never a word. They'd a perished sooner than let Brightling overcrow us. Even that villain, Ticehurst Will, coming out of the Bell for his morning ale, he all but ran under Sir John's horse. Where, sirrah devil? Cries Sir John, reining back. Oh, says Will, market day, is it? And all the bullocks from Brightling here? I spared him his belting for that, the brazen knave. But John Collins was our masterpiece. He happened along street, his jaw tied up where Sebastian had clouted him, when we were trundling the first demi-cannon through the lich gate. I reckon you'll find her middlin' heavy, he says. If you've a mind to pay, I'll loan ye my timber tug. She won't lie easy on Harry Woolwain. That was the one time I ever saw Sebastian taken flat aback. He opened and shut his mouth fishy-like. No offence, says Master John. You've got her reasonable good cheap. I thought you might not grudge me a groat if I helped move her. Ah, he was a masterpiece. They say that morning's work cost our John £200, and he never winked an eyelid, not even when he saw the guns all carted off to Lewis. Neither then nor later? Said Puck. Once. 'Twas after he gave St. Barnabas the new chime of bells. Oh, there was nothing the Collinses, or the Hays, or the Fowles, or the Fanners would not do for the church then. Ask and have, was their song. We had rung 'em in, and he was in the tower with Black Nick Fowl, that gave us our rood screen. The old man pinches the bell-rope with one hand, and scratches his neck with t'other. Sooner she was pulling yon clapper than my neck, he says. That was all. That was Sussex, Seely Sussex for everlasting. And what happened after? Said Una. I went back into England, said Hal slowly. I'd had my lesson against pride, but they tell me I left St. Barnabas's a jewel, just about a jewel. Well a well, 'twas done for and among my own people, and, Father Roger was right, I never knew such trouble or such triumph since. That's the nature of things. A dear, dear land. He dropped his chin on his chest. There's your father at the forge. What's he talking to old Hobden about? Said Puck, opening his hand with 3 leaves in it. Dan looked towards the cottage. "Oh, I know, it's that old oak lying across the brook. Pater always wants it grubbed." In the still valley they could hear old Hobden's deep tones. "Have it as you've a mind to," he was saying, "but the vivers of her roots they hold the bank together. If you grub her out, the bank she'll all come tearing down, and next flood the brook'll swarve up. But have it as you've a mind. The mistress she sets a heap by the ferns on her trunk." "Oh, I'll think it over," said the pater. Una laughed a little bubbling chuckle. "What the devil's in that belfry?" said Hal, with a lazy laugh. "That should be Hobden by his voice." "Why, the oak is a regular bridge for all the rabbits between 3 Acre and our meadow. The best place for wires on the farm, Hobden says. He's got 2 there now," Una answered. "He won't ever let it be grubbed." "Ah, Sussex, silly Sussex for everlasting," murmured Hal, and the next moment their father's voice crawling across to Little Lindens broke the spell as St. Barnabas's clock struck 5. End of Section 8. Hal o' the Draft. Section 9. Dymchurch Flit. Smuggler's Song. If you wake at midnight and hear a horse's feet, don't go drawing back the blind or looking in the street. Them that asks no questions isn't told a lie. Watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. 25 ponies trotting through the dark, brandy for the parson, baccy for the clerk, laces for a lady, letters for a spy, and watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. Running round the wood-lump, if you chance to find little barrels roped and tarred, all full of brandy wined, don't you shout to come and look, nor take 'em for your play. Put the brishwood back again, and they'll be gone next day. If you see the stable-yard setting open wide, if you see a tied horse lying down inside, if your mother mends a coat cut about and tore, if the lining's wet and warm, don't you ask no more. If you meet King George's men, dressed in blue and red, you be careful what you say, and mindful what is said. If they call you pretty maid, and chuck you 'neath the chin, don't you tell 'em where no one is, nor yet where no one's been. Knocks and footsteps round the house, whistles after dark, you've no call for running out till the house-dogs bark. Trusty's here, and Pincher's here, and see how dumb they lie. They don't fret to follow when the gentlemen go by. If you do as you've been told, likely there's a chance you'll be give a dainty doll all the way from France, with a cap of Valenciennes and a velvet hood, a present from the gentleman along o' being good. 25 ponies trotting through the park, brandy for the parson, baccy for the clerk. Them that asks no questions isn't told a lie. Watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. The Bee-Boy's Song. Bees, bees, hark to the bees! Hide from your neighbours as much as you please, but all that has happened to us you must tell, or else we will give you no honey to sell. A maiden in her glory, upon her wedding day, must tell her bees the story, or else they'll fly away, die away, dwindle down and leave you. But if you don't deceive your bees will not deceive you. Marriage, birth, or burying, news across the seas, all you're glad or merry in, you must tell the bees. Tell 'em coming in and out, where the fanners fan, 'cause the bees are just about as curious as a man. Don't you wait where trees are, when the lightnings play, nor don't you hate where bees are, or else they'll pine away, dwine away, anything to leave you. But if you never grieve your bees'll never grieve you. Dymchurch Flit. Just at dusk a soft September rain began to fall on the hop-pickers. The mothers wheeled the bouncing perambulators out of the gardens, bins were put away, and tally-books made up. The young couples strolled home, 2 to each umbrella, and the single men walked behind them, laughing. Dan and Una, who had been picking after their lessons, marched off to roast potatoes at the oast-house, where old Hobden, with blue-eyed Bess, his lurcher dog, lived all the month through, drying the hops. They settled themselves, as usual, on the sack-strewn cot in front of the fires, and, when Hobden drew up the shutter, stared, as usual, at the flameless bed of coals spouting its heat up the dark well of the old-fashioned roundel. Slowly he cracked off a few fresh pieces of coal, packed them, with fingers that never flinched, exactly where they would do most good. Slowly he reached behind him till Dan tilted the potatoes into his iron scoop of a hand. Carefully he arranged them round the fire, and then stood for a moment, black against the glare. As he closed the shutter, the oast-house seemed dark before the day's end, and he lit the candle in the lanthorn. The children liked all these things because they knew them so well. The bee-boy, Hobden's son, who is not quite right in his head, though he can do anything with bees, slipped in like a shadow. They only guessed it when Bess's stump tail wagged against them. A big voice began singing outside in the drizzle. Old Mother Laidinwool had nigh 12 months been dead. She heard the hops were doing well, and then popped up her head. There can't be two people made to holler like that, cried old Hobden, wheeling round. For, says she, the boys I've picked with when I was young and fair, they're bound to be at hoppin', and I'm... A man showed at the doorway. Well, well, they do say hoppin'll draw the very deadest, and now I believed 'em. You Tom? Tom Shoesmith? Tom lowered his lanthorn. You're a hem of a time making your mind to it, Ralph. The stranger strode in, 3 full inches taller than Hobden, a grey-whiskered, brown-faced giant with clear blue eyes. They shook hands, and the children could hear the hard palms rasp together. You ain't lost none of your grip, said Hobden. Was it 30 or 40 year back you broke my head at Peasmarsh Fair? Only 30, and no odds 'tween us regarding heads neither. You had it back at me with a hop pole. How did we get home that night? Swimming? Same way the pheasant come into Gubbs's pocket, by a little luck and a deal of conjuring. Old Hobden laughed in his deep chest. I see you've not forgot your way about the woods. D'ye do any of this still? The stranger pretended to look along a gun. Hobden answered with a quick movement of the hand, as though he were pegging down a rabbit wire. No, that's all that's left me now. Age she must as age she can. And what's your news since all these years? Oh, I've been off to Plymouth, I've been to Dover, I've been rambling, boys, the wide world over, the man answered cheerily. I reckon I know as much of old England as most. He turned towards the children and winked boldly. I lay they told you a sight of lies then. I've been into England fur as Wiltshire once. I was cheated proper over a pair of edging gloves, said Hobden. There's fancy talking everywhere. You've cleaved to your own parts pretty middling close, Ralph. Can't shift an old tree thout it dying, Hobden chuckled. And I be no more anxious to die than you look to be to help me with my hops tonight. The great man leaned against the brickwork of the roundel and swung his arms abroad. Hire me, was all he said, and they stumped upstairs, laughing. The children heard their shovels rasp on the cloth where the yellow hops lie drying above the fires, and all the oast-house filled with the sweet, sleepy smell as they returned. Who is it? Una whispered to the bee-boy. Dunno, no more'n you, if you dunno, said he, and smiled. The voices on the drying floor talked and chuckled together, and the heavy footsteps went back and forth. Presently a hop-pocket dropped through the press-hole overhead, and stiffened and fattened as they shovelled it full. Clank went the press, and rammed the loose stuff into tight cake. Gently, they heard Hobden cry. You'll bust her crop if you lay on so. You be as careless as Gleason's bull, Tom. Come and sit by the fires. She'll do now. They came down, and as Hobden opened the shutter to see if the potatoes were done, Tom Shoesmith said to the children, Put plenty of salt on 'em. That'll show you the sort of man I be. Again he winked, and again the bee-boy laughed, and Una stared at Dan. I know what sort of man you be, old Hobden grunted, groping for the potatoes round the fire. Do ye? Tom went on behind his back. Some of us can't abide horseshoes, or church bells, or running water. And talking of running water, He turned to Hobden, who was backing out of the roundel. "Do you mind the great floods at Robertsbridge, when the miller's man was drowned in the street?" "Middlin' well." Hobden let himself down on the coals by the fire door. "I was courting my woman on the marsh that year. Carter to Mus Plum I was, getting 10 shillings a week. Mine was a marsh woman." "Wonderful Odgate's place, Romney Marsh," said Tom Shoesmith. "I've heard say the world's divided into like Europe, Asia, Africy, Americy, Australy, and Romney Marsh." "The marsh folk think so," said Hobden. "I have had a hem of trouble to get my woman to leave it." "Where did she come out of? I forgot, Ralph." "Dymchurch under the wall," Hobden answered, a potato in his hand. "Then she'd be a Pett or a Whitgift, would she?" "Whitgift." Hobden broke open the potato and ate it with the curious neatness of men who make most of their meals in the blowy open. "She growed to be quite reasonable like, after living in the Weald a while, but our first 20 year or two she was odd fashioned, no bounds. And she was a wonderful hand with bees." He cut away a little piece of potato and threw it out to the door. "Ah, I've heard the Whitgifts could see further through a millstone than most," said Shoesmith. "Did she, now?" "She was honest innocent of any nigromancing," said Hobden. "Only she'd read signs and significations out of birds flying, stars falling, bees hiving, and such, and she'd lie awake, listening for calls, she said." "That don't prove naught," said Tom. "All marsh folk has been smugglers since time everlasting. 'Twould be in her blood to listen out o' nights." "Naturally," old Hobden replied, smiling. "I mind when there was smuggling a sight nearer us than the marsh be, but that wasn't my woman's trouble. 'Twas a passel o' no sense talk," he dropped his voice, "about Pharisees." "Yes, I've heard marshmen bereft in 'em." Tom looked straight at the wide-eyed children beside Bess. "Pharisees?" cried Una. "Fairies? Oh, I see." "People of the hills," said the bee-boy, throwing half of his potato towards the door. "There you be," said Hobden, pointing at him. "My boy, he has her eyes and her outgate senses. That's what she called 'em."
"And what did you think of it all?"
Hobden rumbled. "A man that uses fields and shaws after dark as much as I've done, he don't go out of his road except for keepers."
"But setting that aside," said Tom, coaxingly, "I saw ye throw the good piece out at doors just now. Do you believe, or do ye?"
"There was a great black eye to that tater," said Hobden, indignantly.
"My little eye didn't see un then. It looked as if you meant it for any one that might need it. But setting that aside, do you believe, or do ye?"
"I ain't saying nothing, because I've heard nought and I've seen nought. But if you was to say there was more things after dark in the shaws than men, or fur, or feather, or fin, I dunno as I'd go far about to call you a liar. Now turn again, Tom. What's your say?"
"I'm like you, I say nothing. But I'll tell you a tale, and you can fit it as how you please."
"Passel o' no sense stuff," growled Hobden, but he filled his pipe.
"The marshmen, they call it Dymchurch Flit," Tom went on slowly. You've heard it?"
"My woman, she'd have told it me scores of times. Dunno as I didn't end by belefting it, sometimes." Hobden crossed over as he spoke, and sucked with his pipe at the yellow lanthorn flame. Tom rested one great elbow on one great knee, where he sat among the coal. "Have you ever been in the marsh?" he said to Dan. "Only as far as Rye, once," Dan answered. "Ah, that's but the edge. Back behind of her there's steeples setting beside churches, and wise women setting beside their doors, and the sea setting above the land, and ducks herding wild in the dicks," he meant ditches. "The marsh is just about riddled with dicks and sluices and tide gates and waterlets. You can hear 'em bubbling and grumbling when the tide works in 'em, and then you hear the sea ranging left and right handed all up along the wall. You've seen how flat she is, the marsh. You'd think nothing easier than to walk end on across her. Ah, but the dicks and the waterlets, they twists the roads about as ravelly as witch yarn on the spindles, so you get all turned round in broad daylight." "That's because they've dreened the waters into the dicks," said Hobden.
When I courted my woman, the rushes was green. Me, the rushes was green. And the bailiff of the marshes, he rode up and down as free as the fog. Who is he? Said Dan. Why, the marsh fever and ague. He've clapped me on the shoulder once or twice till I shook proper. But now the draining off of the waters have done away with the fevers, so they make a joke like that the bailiff of the marshes broke his neck in a dick. A wonderful place for bees and ducks 'tis too. And old, Tom went on. Flesh and blood have been there since time everlasting beyond. Well now, speaking among ourselves, the marshmen say that from time everlasting beyond, the Pharisees favoured the marsh above the rest of old England. I lay the marshmen ought to know. They've been out after dark, father and son, smuggling some one thing or t'other since ever wool grew to sheep's backs. They say there was always a middling few Pharisees to be seen on the marsh. Impudent as rabbits they was. They'd dance on the naked roads in the naked daytime. They'd flash their little green lights along the dicks, coming and going, like honest smugglers. Yes, and times they'd lock the church doors against the parson and clerk o' Sundays. That'd be smugglers laying in the lace or the brandy till they could run it out of the marsh. I've told my woman so, said Hobden. I'll lay she didn't belift it then, not if she was a Whitgift. A wonderful choice place for Pharisees, the marsh, by all accounts, till Queen Bess's father, he come in with his reformatories. Would that be a Act of Parliament, like? Hobden asked. Surely. Can't do nothing in old England without Act, warrant and summons. He got his Act allowed him, and they say Queen Bess's father, he used the parish churches something shameful, just about tore the gizzards out of I dunno how many. Some folk in England they held with him, but some they saw it different, and it ended in them taking sides and burning each other no bounds, according which side was top, time being. That terrified the Pharisees, for goodwill among flesh and blood is meat and drink to 'em, and ill will is poison. Same as bees, said the bee-boy. Bees won't stay by a house where there's hating. True, said Tom. This reformation's tarrified the Pharisees, same as the reaper going round a last stand of wheat tarrifies the rabbits. They packed into the marsh from all sides, and they says, fair or foul, we must flit out of this, for merry England's done with, and we're reckoned among the images. Did they all see it that way? Said Hobden. All but one that was called Robin, if you've heard of him. What are you laughing at? Tom turned to Dan. The Pharisees' troubles didn't tetch Robin, 'cause he'd cleaved middling close to people like. No more he never meant to go out of old England, not he. So he was sent messaging for help among flesh and blood. But flesh and blood must always think of their own concerns, and Robin couldn't get through at 'em, ye see. They thought it was tide echoes off the marsh. What did the Pharisees want? Una asked. A boat, to be sure. Their little wings could no more across channel than so many tired butterflies. A boat and a crew they desired to sail 'em over to France, where yet a while folks hadn't tore down the images. They couldn't abide cruel Canterbury bells ringing to Bulveride for more poor men and women to be burnded, nor the king's proud messenger riding through the land giving orders to tear down the images. They couldn't abide it no shape, nor yet they couldn't get their boat and crew to flit by without leave and goodwill from flesh and blood. And flesh and blood came and went about its own business the while the marsh was swarving up with Pharisees from all England over, striving all means to get through at flesh and blood to tell 'em their sore need. I don't know as you've ever heard Pharisees are like chickens. My woman used to say that too, said Hobden, folding his brown arms. They be. You run too many chickens together, and they're grown seconds like, and you get a squat, and your chickens die. Same way, you crowd Pharisees all in one place. They don't die, but flesh and blood walking among 'em is apt to sick up and pine off. They don't mean it, and flesh and blood don't know it, but that's the truth, as I've heard. The Pharisees, through being all stenched up and frightened, and trying to come through with their supplications, they naturally changed the thin airs and humours in flesh and blood. It lay on the marsh like a thunder. Men saw their churches ablaze with the wildfire in the windows after dark. They saw their cattle scattering, and no man scaring, their sheep flocking, and no man driving, their horses lathering, and no man leading. They saw the little low green lights more than ever in the dick sides. They heard the little feet pattering more than ever round the houses. And night and day, day and night, 'twas all as though they were being creeped up on, and hinted at by some one or other that couldn't rightly shape their trouble. Oh, I lay they sweated, man and maid, woman and child. Their nature done 'em no service all the weeks while the marsh was swarving up with Pharisees. But they was flesh and blood, and marshmen before all. They reckoned the signs signified trouble for the marsh, or that the sea 'ud rear up against Dymchurch wall, and they'd be drownded like old Winchelsea, or that the plague was coming. So they looked for the meaning in the sea or in the clouds, far and high up. They never thought to look near and knee high, where they could see naught. Now there was a poor widow at Dymchurch under the wall, which, lacking man or property, she had more time for feeling, and she come to feel that there was a trouble outside her doorstep bigger and heavier than aught she'd ever carried over it. She had 2 sons, one born blind, and t'other struck dumb through falling off the wall when he was little. They was grown men, but not wage earning, and she worked for 'em, keeping bees and answering questions. What sort of questions? Said Dan. Like where lost things might be found, and what to put about a crooked baby's neck, and how to join parted sweethearts. She felt the trouble on the marsh same as eels feel thunder. She was a wise woman. My woman was wonderful weather tender too, said Hobden. I've seen her brish sparks off like an anvil out of her hair in thunderstorms, but she never laid out to answer questions. This woman was a seeker like, and seekers they sometimes find. One night, while she lay abed, hot and aching, there come a dream and tapped at her window, and said, Widow Whitgift, it said, Widow Whitgift. First, by the wings and the whistling, she thought it was peewits, but last she rose and dressed herself, and opened her door to the marsh, and she felt the trouble and the groaning all about her, strong as fever and ague, and she called, What is it? Oh, what is it? Then 'twas all like the frogs in the dicks peeping, then 'twas all like the reeds in the dicks clip-clapping, and then the great tide wave rumbled along the wall, and she couldn't hear proper. 3 times she called, and 3 times the tide wave did her down. But she catched the quiet between, and she cries out, What is the trouble on the marsh that's been lying down with my heart and a rising with my body this month gone? She felt a little hand lay hold on her gown hem, and she stooped to the pull of that little hand. Tom Shoesmith spread his huge fist before the fire and smiled at it. Will the sea drown the marsh? She says. She was a marsh woman first and foremost. No, says the little voice. Sleep sound for all of that. Is the plague coming to the marsh? She says. Them was all the ills she knowed. No, sleep sound for all of that, says Robin. She turned about, half mindful to go in, but the little voices grieved that shrill and sorrowful, she turns back, and she cries, If it's not a trouble of flesh and blood, what can I do? The Pharisees cried out upon her from all round to fetch a boat to sail to France, and come back no more. There's a boat on the wall, she says, but I can't push it down to the sea, nor sail it when 'tis there. Lend us your sons, says all the Pharisees. Give 'em leave and goodwill to sail it for us, mother, oh, mother. One's dumb and the other's blind, she says, but all the dearer to me for that, and you'll lose them in the open sea. The voices just about pierced through her, and there was children's voices too. She stood out all she could, but she couldn't rightly stand against that. So she says, If you can draw my sons for your job, I'll not hinder 'em. You can't ask no more of a mother. She saw them little green lights dance and cross till she was dizzy. She heard them little feet pattering by the thousand. She heard cruel Canterbury bells ringing to Bulverhythe, and she heard the great tide wave ranging along the wall. That was while the Pharisees was working a dream to wake her 2 sons asleep. And while she bit on her fingers, she saw them 2 she'd bore come out and pass out with never a word. She followed 'em, crying pitiful, to the old boat on the wall, and that they took and runned down to the sea. When they'd stepped mast and sail, the blind son speaks up. 'Mother, we're waiting your leave and goodwill to take them over.' Tom Shoesmith threw back his head and half shut his eyes. 'Me,' he said, 'she was a fine valiant woman, the widow Whitgift. She stood twisting the ends of her long hair over her fingers, and she shook like a poplar, making up her mind. The Pharisees all about, they hushed their children from crying, and they waited dumb still. She was all their dependence. Without her leave and goodwill they could not pass, for she was the mother. So she shook like an asp tree, making up her mind. Last she drives the word past her teeth, and 'Go,' she says, 'go with my leave and goodwill.' Then I saw, then they say she had to brace back same as she was wading in the tide water, for the Pharisees just about flowed past her, down the beach to the boat, I don't know how many of them, with their wives and children and valuables, all escaping out of the cruel old England. Silver you could hear clinking, and little bundles hove down to the bottom boards, and passels of little swords and little shields rattling, and little fingers and toes scratching on the boat side to board her when the two sons pushed her off. That boat she sunk lower and lower, but all the widow could see in it was boys moving, hampered like, to get at the tackle. Up sail they did, and away they went, deep as a rye barge, away into the off-shore mists, and the widow Whitgift she sat down and eased her grief till morning light." "I never heard she was all alone," said Hobden. "I remember now. The one called Robin, he stayed with her, they tell. She was all too grievous to listen to his promises." "Ah, she should have made her bargain beforehand. I always told my woman so," Hobden cried. "No, she loaned her sons for a pure love loan, being as she sensed the trouble on the marshes, and was simple good willing to ease it." Tom laughed softly. "She done that. Yes, she done that. From Hythe to Bulverhythe, fretty men and petty maid, ailing woman and wailing child, they took the advantage of the change in the thin airs just about as soon as Pharisees flitted. Folks come out fresh and shining all over the marsh like snails after wet, and that while the widow Whitgift sat grieving on the wall. She might have beleft us, she might have trusted her sons would be sent back. She fussed no bounds when their boat came in after 3 days. And, of course, the sons were both quite cured," said Una. "No, that would have been out of nature. She got 'em back as she sent them. The blind man, he hadn't seen naught of anything, and the dumb man, naturally, he couldn't say aught of what he'd seen. I reckon that was why the Pharisees pitched on 'em for the ferrying job." "But what did Robin promise the widow?" said Dan. "What did he promise now?" Tom pretended to think. "Wasn't your woman a Whitgift, Ralph? Didn't she say?" "She told me a passel of no-sense stuff when he was born." Hobden pointed at his son. "There was always to be one of 'em that could see further into the millstone than most." "Me, that's me!" said the bee-boy so suddenly that they all laughed. "I've got it now," said Tom, slapping his knee. "So long as the Whitgift blood lasted, Robin promised there would allus be one of her stock that no trouble 'ud lie on, no maid 'ud sigh on, no night could frighten, no fright could harm, no harm could make sin, and no woman could make a fool." "Well, ain't that just me?" said the bee-boy, where he sat in the silver square of the great September moon that was staring into the oast-house door. They were the exact words she told me when we first found he wasn't like the others. But it beats me how you known 'em," said Hobden. "Aha, there's more under my hat besides hair." Tom laughed and stretched himself. "When I've seen these two young folk home, we'll make a night of old days, Ralph, with passing old tales, eh? And where might you live?" he asked gravely to Dan. "And do you think your pa'd give me a drink for taking you there, missy?" They giggled so at this that they had to run out. Tom picked them both up, set one on each broad shoulder, and tramped across the ferny pasture where the cows puffed milky puffs at them in the moonlight. "Oh, Puck, Puck! I guessed you right from when you talked about the salt. How could you ever do it?" Una cried, swinging along, delighted. "Do what?" he said, and climbed the stile by the pollard oak. "Pretend to be Tom Shoesmith," said Dan, and they ducked to avoid the two little ashes that grow by the bridge over the brook. Tom was almost running. "Yes, that be my name, Mass Dan," he said, hurrying over the silent shining lawn, where a rabbit sat by the big whitethorn near the croquet ground. "Here you be." He strode into the old kitchen yard and slid them down as Ellen came to ask questions. "I'm helping in Mus' Spray's oast house," he said to her. "No, I'm no foreigner. I knowed this country 'fore your mother was born. And yes, it's dry work oasting, miss, thank you." Ellen went to get a jug, and the children went in, magicked once more by oak, ash, and thorn. End of section 9. Dymchurch Flit. Section 10. The Treasure and the Law. A 3-part song. I'm just in love with all these three, the weald and the marsh and the down country. Nor I don't know which I love the most, the weald or the marsh or the white chalk coast. I've buried my heart in a ferny hill, 'twixt a little low shore and a great high gill. O hop vine yaller and wood smoke blue, I reckon you'll keep her middling true. I've loosed my mind for to out and run on a marsh that was old when the kings begun. O Romney Level and Benset Reeds, I reckon you know what my mind needs. I've given my soul to the Southdown grass, and sheep bells tinkled where you pass. O Firle and Ditchelin and sails at sea, I reckon you'll keep my soul or me. Song of the Fifth River. When first by Eden tree the 4 great rivers ran, to each was appointed a man, her prince and ruler to be. But after this was ordained, the ancient legends tell, there came dark Israel, for whom no river remained. Then he that is wholly just said to him, Fling on the ground a handful of yellow dust, and a 5th great river shall run, mightier than these 4, in secret the earth around, and her secret evermore shall be shown to thee and thy race. So it was said and done, and deep in the veins of the earth, and fed by 1,000 springs that comfort the market-place, or sap the power of kings, the great 5th river had birth, even as it was foretold, the secret river of gold. And Israel laid down his sceptre and his crown, to brood on that river bank, where the waters flashed and sank, and burrowed in earth and fell, and bided a season below, for reason that none might know, save only Israel. He is Lord of the last, the 5th, most wonderful flood. He hears her thunder past, and her song is in his blood. He can foresay she will fall, for he knows which fountain dries, behind which desert belt 1,000 leagues to the south. He can foresay she will rise. He knows what far snows melt, along what mountain wall 1,000 leagues to the north. He snuffs the coming drought, as he snuffs the coming rain. He knows what each will bring forth, and he turns it to his gain. A prince without a sword, a ruler without a throne, Israel follows his quest, in every land a guest, of many lands the lord, in no land king is he. But the 5th great river keeps the secret of her deeps for Israel alone, as it was ordered to be. The Treasure and the Law. Now it was the 3rd week in November, and the woods rang with the noise of pheasant shooting. No one hunted that steep, cramped country except the village beagles, who, as often as not, escaped from their kennels and made a day of their own. Dan and Una found a couple of them towling around the kitchen garden after the laundry cat. The little brutes were only too pleased to go rabbiting, so the children ran them all along the brook pastures and into little Linden's farmyard, where the old sow vanquished them, and up into the quarry hole, where they started a fox. He headed for Far Wood, and there they frightened out all the pheasants who were sheltering from a big beat across the valley. Then the cruel guns began again, and they grabbed the beagles lest they should stray and get hurt. "I wouldn't be a pheasant in November for a lot," Dan panted, as he caught Folly by the neck. "Why did you laugh that horrid way?" "I didn't," said Una, sitting on Flora, the fat lady dog. "Oh, look! The silly birds are going back to their own woods instead of ours, where they would be safe. Safe till it pleased you to kill them. An old man, so tall he was almost a giant, stepped from behind the clump of hollies by Volaterrae. The children jumped, and the dogs dropped like setters. He wore a sweeping gown of dark thick stuff, lined and edged with yellowish fur, and he bowed a bent-down bow that made them feel both proud and ashamed. Then he looked at them steadily, and they stared back without doubt or fear. "You are not afraid?" he said, running his hands through his splendid grey beard. "Not afraid that those men yonder," he jerked his head towards the incessant pop-pop of the guns from the lower woods, "will do you hurt?" "Well," Dan liked to be accurate, especially when he was shy. A friend of mine told me that one of the beaters got peppered last week. Hit in the leg, I mean. You see, Mr. Meyer will fire at rabbits. But he gave Waxy Garnett a quid. Sovereign, I mean. And Waxy told Hobden he'd have stood both barrels for half the money." "He doesn't understand," Una cried, watching the pale, troubled face. "Oh, I wish—" She had scarcely said it when Puck rustled out of the hollies and spoke to the man quickly in foreign words. Puck wore a long cloak too. The afternoon was just frosting down, and it changed his appearance altogether. "Nay, nay," he said at last. "You did not understand the boy. A freeman was a little hurt, by pure mischance, at the hunting." "I know that mischance. What did his lord do? Laugh and ride over him?" the old man sneered. "It was one of your people did the hurt, Cadmiel." Puck's eyes twinkled maliciously. "So he gave the freeman a piece of gold, and no more was said." "A Jew drew blood from a Christian, and no more was said?" Cadmiel cried. "Never! When did they torture him?" "No man may be bound, or fined, or slain till he has been judged by his peers," Puck insisted. "There is but one law in old England for Jew or Christian, the law that was signed at Runnymede." "Why, that's Magna Charta," Dan whispered. It was one of the few history dates that he could remember. Cadmiel turned on him with a sweep and a whir of his spicy-scented gown. "Dost thou know of that, babe?" he cried, and lifted his hands in wonder. "Yes," said Dan, firmly. "Magna Carta was signed by John that Henry III put his heel upon. And old Hobden says that if it hadn't been for her, he calls everything her, you know, the keepers would have him clapped in Lewes jail all year round." Again Puck translated to Cadmiel in the strange solemn-sounding language, and at last Cadmiel laughed. "Out of the mouths of babes do we learn," said he. "But tell me now, and I will not call you a babe, but a rabbi, why did the king sign the roll of the new law at Runnymede? For he was a king." Dan looked sideways at his sister. It was her turn. "Because he jolly well had to," said Una softly. "The barons made him." "Nay," Cadmiel answered, shaking his head. "You Christians always forget that gold does more than the sword. Our good king signed because he could not borrow more money from us bad Jews." He curved his shoulders as he spoke. "A king without gold is a snake with a broken back and—" His nose sneered up and his eyebrows frowned down. "It is a good deed to break a snake's back. That was my work," he cried triumphantly to Puck. "Spirit of earth, bear witness that that was my work." He shot up to his full towering height, and his words rang like a trumpet. He had a voice that changed its tone almost as an opal changes colour, sometimes deep and thundery, sometimes thin and waily, but always it made you listen. "Many people can bear witness to that," Puck answered. "Tell these babes how it was done. Remember, master, they do not know doubt or fear." "So I saw in their faces when we met," said Cadmiel. "Yet surely, surely they are taught to spit upon Jews." "Are they?" said Dan, much interested. "Whereat?" Puck fell back a pace, laughing. "Cadmiel is thinking of King John's reign," he explained. "His people were badly treated then." "Oh, we know that," they answered, and, it was very rude of them, but they could not help it, they stared straight at Cadmiel's mouth to see if his teeth were all there. It stuck in their lesson memory that King John used to pull out Jews' teeth to make them lend him money. Cadmiel understood the look and smiled bitterly. No, your king never drew my teeth. I think perhaps I drew his. Listen, I was not born among Christians, but among Moors, in Spain, in a little white town under the mountains. Yes, the Moors are cruel, but at least their learned men dare to think. It was prophesied of me at my birth that I should be a lawgiver to a people of a strange speech and a hard language. We Jews are always looking for the prince and the lawgiver to come. Why not? My people in the town, we were very few, set me apart as a child of the prophecy, the chosen of the chosen. We Jews dream so many dreams. You would never guess it to see us slink about the rubbish heaps in our quarter, but at the day's end, doors shut, candles lit, aha, then we become the chosen again. He paced back and forth through the wood as he talked. The rattle of the shotguns never ceased, and the dogs whimpered a little and lay flat on the leaves. I was a prince. Yes, think of a little prince who had never known rough words in his own house handed over to shouting, bearded rabbis, who pulled his ears and filliped his nose, all that he might learn to be king when his time came. Eh, such a little prince it was. One eye he kept on the stone-throwing Moorish boys, and the other it roved about the streets looking for his kingdom. Yes, and he learned to cry softly when he was hunted up and down those streets. He learned to do all things without noise. He played beneath his father's table when the great candle was lit, and he listened as children listen to the talk of his father's friends above the table. They came across the mountains, from out of all the world, for my prince's father was their counsellor. They came from behind the armies of Salah ud-Din, from Rome, from Venice, from England. They stole down our alley, they tapped secretly at our door, they took off their rags, they arrayed themselves, and they talked to my father at the wine. All over the world the heathen fought each other. They brought news of these wars, and while he played beneath my table, my prince heard these meanly dressed ones decide between themselves how, and when, and for how long king should draw sword against king, and people rise up against people. Why not? There can be no war without gold, and we Jews know how the earth's gold moves with the seasons, and the crops, and the winds, circling and looping and rising and sinking away like a river, a wonderful underground river. How should the foolish kings know that while they fight and steal and kill? The children's faces show that they knew nothing at all as, with open eyes, they trotted and turned beside the long striding old man. He twitched his gown over his shoulders, and a square plate of gold, studded with jewels, gleamed for an instant through the fur, like a star through flying snow. No matter, he said, but, credit me, my prince saw peace or war decided not once, but many times, by the fall of a coin spun between a Jew from Berry and a Jewess from Alexandria, in his father's house, when the great candle was lit. Such power had we Jews among the Gentiles. Ah, my little prince, do you wonder that he learned quickly? Why not? He muttered to himself and went on. My trade was that of a physician. When I had learned it in Spain, I went to the east to find my kingdom. Why not? A Jew is as free as a sparrow, or a dog. He goes where he is hunted. In the east I found libraries where men dared to think, schools of medicine where they dared to learn. I was diligent in my business. Therefore I stood before kings. I have been a brother to princes, and a companion to beggars, and I have walked between the living and the dead. There was no profit in it. I did not find my kingdom. So, in the 10th year of my travels, when I had reached the uttermost eastern sea, I returned to my father's house. God had wonderfully preserved my people. None had been slain, none even wounded, and only a few scourged. I became once more a son in my father's house. Again the great candle was lit. Again the meanly apparelled ones tapped on our door after dusk, and again I heard them weigh out peace and war as they weighed out the gold on the table. But I was not rich, not very rich. Therefore, when those that had power and knowledge and wealth talked together, I sat in the shadow. Why not? Yet all my wanderings had shown me one sure thing, which is, that a king without money is like a spear without a head. He cannot do much harm. I said, therefore, to Elias of Bury, a great one among our people, Why do our people lend any more to the kings that oppress us? Because, said Elias, if we refuse, they stir up their people against us, and the people are tenfold more cruel than kings. If thou doubtest, come with me to Bury in England, and live as I live. I saw my mother's face across the candle flame, and I said, I will come with thee to Bury. Maybe my kingdom shall be there. So I sailed with Elias to the darkness and the cruelty of Bury in England, where there are no learned men. How can a man be wise if he hate? At Bury I kept his accounts for Elias, and I saw men kill Jews there, by the tower. No, none laid hands on Elias. He lent money to the king, and the king's favour was about him. A king will not take the life so long as there is any gold. This king, yes, John, oppressed his people bitterly, because they would not give him money. Yet his land was a good land. If only he had given it rest, he might have cropped it as a Christian crops his beard. But even that little did he not know, for God had deprived him of all understanding, and had multiplied pestilence and famine and despair upon the people. Therefore his people turned against us Jews, who are all people's dogs. Why not? Lastly, the barons and the people rose together against the king because of his cruelties. Nay, nay, the barons did not love the people, but they saw that if the king eat up and destroyed the common people, he would presently destroy the barons. They joined then, as cats and pigs will join to slay a snake. I kept the accounts, and I watched all these things, for I remembered the prophecy. A great gathering of barons, to most of whom we had lent money, came to Bury, and there, after much talk and 1,000 runnings about, they made a roll of the new laws that they would force on the king. If he swore to keep those laws, they would allow him a little money. That was the king's god, money, to waste. They showed us the roll of the new laws. Why not? We had lent them money, we knew all their counsels, we Jews shivering behind our doors in Bury. He threw out his hands suddenly. We did not seek to be paid all in money. We sought power. Power! Power! That is our God in our captivity. Power to use. I said to Elias, These new laws are good. Lend no more money to the king. So long as he has money, he will lie and slay the people. Nay, said Elias, I know this people. They are madly cruel. Better one king than 1,000 butchers. I have lent a little money to the barons, or they would torture us, but my most I will lend to the king. He hath promised me a place near him at court, where my wife and I shall be safe. But if the king be made to keep these new laws, I said, the land will have peace, and our trade will grow. If we lend, he will fight again. Who hath made thee a lawgiver in England? Said Elias. I know these people. Let the dogs tear one another. I will lend the king 10,000 pieces of gold, and he can fight the barons at his pleasure. There are not 2,000 pieces of gold in all England this summer, I said, for I kept the accounts, and I knew how the earth's gold moved, that wonderful underground river. Elias barred home the windows, and, his hands about his mouth, he told me how, when he was trading with small wares in a French ship, he had come to the castle of Pevensey. Oh, said Dan, Pevensey again, and looked at Una, who nodded and skipped. There, after they had scattered his pack up and down the great hall, some young knights carried him to an upper room, and dropped him into a well in a wall, that rose and fell with the tide. They called him Joseph, and they threw torches at his wet head. Why not? Why, of course, cried Dan. Didn't you know it was a... Puck held up his hand to stop him, and Cadmiel, who never noticed, went on. When the tide dropped, he thought he stood on old armour, but feeling with his toes, he raked up bar upon bar of soft gold. Some wicked treasure of the old days put away, and the secret cut off by the sword. I have heard the like before. So have we, Una whispered, but it wasn't wicked a bit. Elias took a morsel of the stuff with him, and thrice yearly he would return to Pevensey as a chapman, selling at no price or profit, till they suffered him to sleep in the empty room, where he would plumb and grope, and steal away a few bars. The great store of it still remained, and by long brooding he had come to look on it as his own. Yet when we thought how we should lift and convey it, we saw no way. This was before the word of the Lord had come to me. A walled fortress possessed by Normans, in the midst a 40-foot tide-well out of which to remove secretly many horse-loads of gold. Hopeless! So Elias wept. Adar, his wife, wept too. She had hoped to stand beside the Queen's Christian tiring maids at court, when the king should give them that place at court which he had promised. Why not? She was born in England. An odious woman. The present evil to us was that Elias, out of his strong folly, had, as it were, promised the king that he would arm him with more gold. Wherefore the king in his camp stopped his ears against the barons and the people. Wherefore men died daily. Adar so desired her place at court, she besought Elias to tell the king where the treasure lay, that the king might take it by force, and they would trust in his gratitude. Why not? This Elias refused to do, for he looked on the gold as his own. They quarrelled, and they wept at the evening meal, and late in the night came one Langton, a priest, almost learned, to borrow more money for the barons. Elias and Adar went to their chamber. Cadmiel laughed scornfully in his beard. The shots across the valley stopped as the shooting party changed their ground for the last beat. So it was I, not Elias, he went on quietly, that made terms with Langton touching the 40th of the new laws. What terms? Said Puck quickly. The 40th of the Great Charter say, to none will we sell, refuse, or deny right or justice. True, but the barons had written first, to no free man. It cost me 200 broad pieces of gold to change those narrow words. Langton, the priest, understood. Jew though thou art, said he, the change is just, and if ever Christian and Jew come to be equal in England, thy people may thank thee. Then he went out stealthily, as men do who deal with Israel by night. I think he spent my gift upon his altar. Why not? I have spoken with Langton. He was such a man as I might have been if we Jews had been a people, but yet in many things a child. I heard Elias and Adar above stairs quarrel, and, knowing the woman was the stronger, I saw that Elias would tell the king of the gold, and that the king would continue in his stubbornness. Therefore I saw that the gold must be put away from the reach of any man. Of a sudden the word of the Lord came to me, saying, The morning is come, O thou that dwellest in the land. Cadmiel halted, all black against the pale green sky beyond the wood, a huge robed figure like the Moses in the picture Bible. I rose, I went out, and as I shut the door on that house of foolishness, the woman looked from the window and whispered, I have prevailed upon my husband to tell the king. I answered, There is no need, the Lord is with me. In that hour the Lord gave me full understanding of all that I must do, and his hand covered me in my ways. First I went to London, to a physician of our people, who sold me certain drugs that I needed. You shall see why. Thence I went swiftly to Pevensey. Men fought all around me, for there were neither rulers nor judges in the abominable land. Yet when I walked by them, they cried out that I was one Ahasuerus, a Jew, condemned, as they believed, to live forever, and they fled from me every ways. Thus the Lord saved me for my work, and at Pevensey I bought me a little boat, and moored it on the mud beneath the marsh gate of the castle. That also God showed me. He was as calm as though he were speaking of some stranger, and his voice filled the little bare wood with rolling music. I cast. His hand went to his breast, and again the strange jewel gleamed. I cast the drugs which I had prepared into the common well of the castle. Nay, I did no harm. The more we physicians know, the less we do. Only the fool says, I dare. I caused a blotched and itching rash to break out upon their skins, but I knew it would fade in 15 days. I did not stretch out my hand against their life. They in the castle thought it was the plague, and they ran forth, taking with them their very dogs. A Christian physician, seeing that I was a Jew and a stranger, vowed that I had brought the sickness from London. This is the one time I have ever heard a Christian leech speak truth of any disease. Therefore the people beat me, but a merciful woman said, "Do not kill him now. Push him into our castle with his plague, and if, as he says, it will abate on the 15th day, we can kill him then." Why not? They drove me across the drawbridge of the castle, and fled back to their booths. Thus I came to be alone with the treasure. "But did you know this was all going to happen just right?" said Una. "My prophecy was that I should be a lawgiver to a people of a strange land and a hard speech. I knew I should not die. I washed my cuts. I found the tide well in the wall, and from Sabbath to Sabbath I dove and dug there in that empty Christian-smelling fortress. I spoiled the Egyptians. If they had only known it! I drew up many good loads of gold, which I loaded by night into my boat. There had been gold dust too, but that had been washed away by the tides." "Didn't you ever wonder who had put it there?" said Dan, stealing a glance at Puck's calm, dark face under the hood of his gown. Puck shook his head and pursed his lips. "Often, for the gold was new to me," Cadmiel replied. "I know the golds. I can judge them in the dark, but this was heavier and redder than any we deal in. Perhaps it was the very gold of Parvaim. Why not? It went to my heart to heave it onto the mud, but I saw well that if the evil thing remained, or if even the hope of finding it remained, the king would not sign the new laws, and the land would perish." "Oh, marvel!" said Puck beneath his breath, rustling in the dead leaves. "When the boat was loaded, I washed my hands 7 times, and pared beneath my nails, for I would not keep 1 grain. I went out by the little gate where the castle's refuse is thrown. I dared not hoist sail, lest men should see me, but the Lord commanded the tide to bear me carefully, and I was far from land before the morning." "Weren't you afraid?" said Una. "Why? There were no Christians in the boat. At sunrise I made my prayer, and cast the gold, all that gold into the deep sea. A king's ransom. No, the ransom of a people. When I had loosed hold of the last bars, the Lord commanded the tide to return me to a haven at the mouth of a river, and thence I walked across a wilderness to Lewis, where I have brethren. They opened the door to me, and they say, I had not eaten for 2 days, they say that I fell across the threshold, crying, 'I have sunk an army with horsemen in the sea.'" "But you hadn't," said Una. "Oh yes, I see. You meant that King John might have spent it on that." "Even so," said Cadmiel. The firing broke out again close behind them. The pheasants poured over the top of a belt of tall firs. They could see young Mr. Meyer in his new yellow gaiters, very busy and excited at the end of the line, and they could hear the thud of the falling birds. "But what did Elias of Bury do?" demanded Puck. "He had promised money to the king." Cadmiel smiled grimly. "I sent him word from London that the Lord was on my side. When he heard that the plague had broken out in Pevensey, and that a Jew had been thrust into the castle to cure it, he understood my word was true. He and Adar hurried to Lewis and asked me for an accounting. He still looked on the gold as his own. I told them where I had laid it, and I gave them full leave to pick it up. Well, the curses of a fool and the dust of a journey are 2 things no wise man can escape. But I pitied Elias. The king was wroth at him because he could not lend. The barons were wroth at him because they had heard that he would have lent to the king. And Adar was wroth at him because she was an odious woman. They took ship from Lewis to Spain. That was wise." "And you? Did you see the signing of the law at Runnymede?" said Puck, as Cadmiel laughed noiselessly. "Nay, who am I to meddle with things too high for me? I returned to Bury, and lent money on the autumn crops. Why not? There was a crackle overhead. A cock pheasant that had sheered aside after being hit spattered down almost on top of them, driving up the dry leaves like a shell. Flora and Folly threw themselves at it. The children rushed forward, and when they had beaten them off and smoothed down the plumage, Cadmiel had disappeared. Well, said Puck calmly, what did you think of it? Wieland gave the sword gave the treasure, and the treasure gave the law. It's as natural as an oak growing. I don't understand. Didn't he know it was Sir Richard's old treasure? Said Dan. And why did Sir Richard and brother Hugh leave it lying about? And never mind, said Una politely. He'll let us come and go and look and know another time, won't you, Puck? Another time, maybe, Puck answered. Brrr, it's cold and late. I'll race you towards home. They hurried down into the sheltered valley. The sun had almost sunk behind Cherry Clack. The trodden ground by the cattle gates was freezing at the edges, and the new-waked north wind blew the night on them from over the hills. They picked up their feet and flew across the browned pastures, and when they halted, panting in the steam of their own breath, the dead leaves whirled up behind them. There was oak and ash and thorn enough in that year-end shower to magic away 1,000 memories. So they trotted to the brook at the bottom of the lawn, wondering why Flora and Folly had missed the quarry-hole fox. Old Hobden was just finishing some hedge-work. They saw his white smock glimmer in the twilight where he faggoted the rubbish. "Winter, he's come, I reckon, Mass Dan," he called. "Hard times now till Hethel Cuckoo Fair. Yes, we'll all be glad to see the old woman let the cuckoo out of the basket for to start lawful spring in England." They heard a crash and a stamp and a splash of water as though a heavy old cow were crossing almost under their noses. Hobden ran forward angrily to the ford. "Gleasoned bull again, playing Robin all over the farm. Oh, look, Mus' Dan, his great footmark as big as a trencher. No bounds to his impudence. He might count himself to be a man, or somebody." A voice the other side of the brook boomed, "I marvel who his cloak would turn when Puck had led him round, or where those waking fires would burn." Then the children went in singing "Farewell Rewards and Fairies" at the tops of their voices. They had forgotten that they had not even said good night to Puck. The Children's Song. Land of our birth, we pledge to thee our love and toil in the years to be, when we are grown and take our place as men and women with our race. Father in heaven who lovest all, O help thy children when they call, that they may build from age to age an undefiled heritage. Teach us to bear the yoke in youth with steadfastness and careful truth, that in our time thy grace may give the truth whereby the nations live. Teach us to rule ourselves alway, controlled and cleanly night and day, that we may bring, if need arise, no maimed or worthless sacrifice. Teach us to look in all our ends on thee for judge, and not our friends, that we with thee may walk uncowed by fear or favour of the crowd. Teach us the strength that cannot seek, by deed or thought, to hurt the weak, that under thee we may possess man's strength to comfort man's distress. Teach us delight in simple things, and mirth that has no bitter springs, forgiveness free of evil done, and love to all men neath the sun. Land of our birth, our faith our pride, for whose dear sake our fathers died, O motherland, we pledge to thee head, heart, and hand through the years to be. End of section 10, The Treasure and the Law, and end of Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling.